in terms when it comes to returning to training, sport, specifically during this time, but also from a injury of returning from injury as well. So this can be applied, this idea or model can be easily applied for someone who's injured themselves, like Nick, Sam, Karen, anyone who's injured themselves. We can use these ideas or principles to actually guide and make the correct choices when it comes to exercise prescription, load management, but then making adequate choices and progressions throughout the actual process. So introduction to returning to training and sport. So we're going to break it down to different sections. The first one's going to be the physiology of returning. We're going to talk about in terms of the adaptations that you get from training, but also what happens to those training-induced adaptations. And then we're also going to talk about muscle memory, what people think muscle memory is. It's technically the muscles do have a level of memory, but in terms of the actual mechanism, I'll explain a little bit more. Next after that is the psychology of returning. So the whole idea is with this is we're managing expectations. That's better. We're managing expectations of the individual. And I've got kind of like a display of what people think it is versus what is actually going on. And also an actual model of how much volume you should actually be increasing it in a sporting context, but also it can be applied within a general context. So someone who's done zero training and who just wants to get back into the training or the gym, we can easily apply this general idea or concept to them as well. There also what happens when training is ramped up too quickly. So in terms of the physiology side, we know that we get to a point where if we train too much too soon or too much load, too much intensity way too soon, the potential implications to that, and George will discuss a little bit more about that as well. Then we're also going to go through injury prevention strategies. So that's basically the whole idea is to do no harm whilst we're going through this whole process. The potential of injury, the potential of all the soft tissue side, but also the potential of the long-term issues is actually quite high if you don't get the early stages right. So we really want to nail that side first. But then we're going to look at the practical applications. So the main message is do no harm and slowly ramp it up, but we'll explain more.
So as Trent was saying, guys, the main thing I wanted to speak about today, particularly from a physio perspective, was how to prevent injuries. So obviously at the moment, a lot of people are training from home. They're possibly changing the way they train, given they may have limited equipment. People are doing much different things to what they're used to. So like Trent was saying, once they get back to their regular training and they ramp things up, that's when obviously injury is likely to occur. So I think some of the main things that I sort of recommend to my patients in order to monitor their training and say reduce the likelihood of injury is firstly, we're going a bit back to front here, but keeping a training diary. So monitoring your training volume, so your sets, your reps, and your loads. So how much weight you're using at the gym, or for running, it's either distance or time, and also your RPE. So the guys that are in an athlete would obviously be aware of your RPE, so your rate of perceived exertion, and it's just sort of a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of how strenuous you found a particular activity. And the main thing I think as well, I think it's good for people to have a basic understanding of the basic sort of training principles. So again, something the guys at Inner Athlete would be well familiar with would be progressive overload. So it's something that people tend to get a bit stuck with sometimes, where they perform, the same exercise all the time at the same repetitions, or they go for the same run, whereas their goal might be to get fitter, stronger, faster, but you can't expect to do the same thing and get a different result. So in basic terms, the concept of progressive overload is providing the body with a stimuli that is great enough for the body to require it to adapt and make change. So another thing I'm pretty big on, guys, is people recording or sort of videotaping their lifts. So I've got the squat, the dead, the bench here, but whether it's a lunge or some other somewhat compound exercise, I get patients I'm happy for them to send me videos of their squat, their dead, their bench, or again, a walking lunge, like we said before, in order to monitor their form more than anything. And the last part of this section was, if I could emphasize anything from a physio perspective, particularly post COVID and everything else that's happening at the moment and people returning to sport, is less is more. I tend to find, particularly from a physio perspective, that there's this spectrum where, as a physio, we tend to sort of be maybe too conservative in terms of, let's do 20 sets of clams and hip abduction and not really progress things enough. And then I also see the PT side of things, where I've got personal trainers I work closely with that will tell me that they'll feel that, the patient, so the client isn't happy unless they're, like Trent said, they're really sore, or, they're feeling it the next day or something like that. Whereas I think the importance of PTs and physios and coaches and all the above working together to take a client-centered approach. So whatever's in their best interest. If they want to be sore and that's their main goal, that's fine. But I'm more the mentality of, if this person is, lifting a comfortable weight that they're happy to push themselves, they're enjoying training, they're injury-free, let's keep facilitating that. That's more my sort of train of thought. So my first case example would be, I had a gentleman who was a desk worker, so accountant for 20 years, and then decided to change his role and become a full-time gardener / landscaper with Jim's Mowing. So he went from a job which is obviously quite sedentary, wasn't moving around a lot, and then he's gone to a job where he's mowing, he's hedging, he's doing all these physical things, and he ended up with some pretty sore, pretty significant tennis elbow. So for those that don't know, tennis elbow is just like an overload condition of the muscles within the forearm. And this guy got to the point that he had overloaded his forearm so much, he, grasping simple objects, even like a pen, even pressing like his deodorant in the morning was painful. That's how sore he really was. So the fact that he went from, again, sedentary work to overloading those tendons, led to a fair bit of pain. So he's someone who took a fair bit of time to settle his symptoms, but in a more easier progression, it'd be ideal for him to sort of begin with, initially weekend work. So if that was what he wanted to transition to, he might start, a Saturday afternoon, might do a bit of work, and then, have like a Monday, Wednesday, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday with that day off in between to recover, to gradually increase the load for his forearm and everything else to cope with what he's doing. So I think that sort of case example was quite appropriate in terms of relevant to what Trent was saying about allowing your tissues to adapt.